Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. A woman pulls into McDonald's with her two kids in the back seat. It's a normal summer evening in Mississippi. By the time her order is ready, she's dead, shot in cold blood before the eyes of her children. The question isn't just who did it, it's why no one stopped it. June 16, 2025. Brandon, Mississippi, a city of just under 25,000 people, and not the kind of place where homicide is routine. But just before 7 p.m. that Monday evening, a call came into Rankin County Emergency Services reporting a double gunshot in the parking lot of a McDonald's off Stribling Lane. Responders arrived within minutes. One adult female was found slumped beside the open driver's side door of a gray SUV. Blood pooling. No pulse. A semi-automatic handgun was located on the ground nearby. Another adult male was found a few feet away with a gunshot wound to the head. Alive, but barely. Two minors were present. Neither injured, but visibly in shock. One was crying. The other was motionless, staring forward. Brandon police immediately secured the scene and contacted the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, MBI. Crime scene photos were taken before any movement. Shell casings, 2 in total, were flagged and cataloged. The weapon was identified as a Smith & Wesson 9mm, standard issue but unregistered. No sign of struggle, no defensive wounds on the victim, no broken glass, no indication of attempted robbery. According to a time-stamped surveillance file pulled later that night, the woman's SUV entered the McDonald's lot at 6:41 p.m. She parked in the second row, directly facing the children's play area. At 6:44, a male subject appears in frame from the east lot on foot, moving toward her vehicle. He approaches the driver's side. Less than 10 seconds later, she collapses. At 6:45, the man turns the weapon on himself. At 6:46, multiple customers from the dining area run outside, one of them using a cell phone. That call was the 911. The victim was pronounced dead at the scene. Her identity was confirmed on site by relatives within the hour. Kiana Jackson, 25 years old, a lifelong resident of Pearl, Mississippi, mother of two. The male subject was not immediately identified pending medical stabilization and fingerprint confirmation. He was transported to the University of Mississippi Medical Center under police supervision. Brandon PD labeled the situation a targeted incident. Not random, no threat to the public, no other suspects sought. But beneath the clean conclusion of a closed case lay a problem, a deeper one. Because while the shooting itself lasted mere seconds, the setup may have taken weeks, maybe months. And based on early forensic analysis, someone had been tracking Kiana. This wasn't an outburst. It was a decision. What caught the attention of investigators early wasn't just the brazen location, but the lack of hesitation. The shooter knew exactly where Kiana would be. He arrived first. He waited. Then he executed. That timeline alone raised red flags. In the hours following the shooting, investigators began requesting phone data, car GPS records, and surveillance tapes not just from McDonald's, but from surrounding businesses. MBI cybercrime analysts were pulled in to assist with potential digital traces. And within 24 hours, a detail emerged that changed the direction of the case. A traffic cam on Old Brandon Road showed Kiana's SUV leaving Pearl at 5:09 p.m., over 90 minutes before the shooting. That's not unusual. But 10 seconds later, a second vehicle followed. Same direction, same lane. Less than 20 feet behind. Investigators now had a critical question. Was this man following her? If so, for how long? And more importantly, why? No threats had been reported by Kiana in the weeks leading up to her death. She had no active restraining orders, no pending court cases. Her phone records showed mostly benign communication. Text to her sister about daycare, a call to her grandmother, nothing suspicious on the surface. But appearances lie. And when they pulled her deleted texts from 3 days prior, a string of messages flagged by forensic keyword algorithms made one investigator pause. Don't bring them where I can see you. You never listen. You think I'm bluffing? Keep playing. These messages were gone from her phone, manually deleted. But the cloud backup hadn't been wiped. By mid-morning on June 17th, the working theory shifted. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment domestic dispute. It was a premeditated act of control, by someone who believed that if they couldn't control Kiana alive, they'd control her memory by silencing her for good. The lead investigator noted in his report, "We don't typically see murders in daylight, in public, with minors present. That alone tells us something about the offender's state of mind. This wasn't about escape. This was about spectacle." What shocked the team more was how normal Kiana's life appeared from the outside. No financial red flags, no substance abuse, no custody battles filed. So the question investigators now faced wasn't just who pulled the trigger. They'd know that soon enough. The question was, who failed Kiana long before it happened? By the end of the first 24 hours, the autopsy report was initiated. The children were placed in temporary care with maternal relatives. And McDonald's corporate released a statement, "We are cooperating fully with authorities." But no statement could explain how a mother of two was executed in front of her children at a fast food restaurant on a Monday evening. By the time investigators wrapped the scene at McDonald's, it was already late into the evening of June 16, 2025. A preliminary death certificate for Kiana Jackson was issued before midnight. Cause, single gunshot wound to the chest at close range. Manner, homicide. Time of death, approximately 6:44 p.m. The next task was not about identifying the killer. It was about understanding the victim, reconstructing her last few months, her routines, her habits, and any potential indicators of threat that went unnoticed. In homicide investigations, particularly those involving intimate partner violence, the question isn't only what happened, but whether it could have been predicted or prevented. Kiana Shania Jackson, age 25, was born and raised in Pearl, Mississippi. She had no criminal record, no known affiliations, and no major financial liabilities. She was a graduate of Pearl High School and had held multiple retail and administrative jobs over the past 6 years. At the time of her death, she worked part-time at a logistics warehouse and supplemented her income through digital reselling. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom duplex in Pearl with her 2 children, age 5 and 3. Neighbors described her as quiet, polite, and responsible. According to her landlord, her rent was never late. Utility records showed no unusual usage spikes or outages. But surface stability often conceals deeper patterns. When officers visited Kiana's residence on the night of the incident to collect personal items for next-of-kin identification, they were met with a home that appeared orderly, almost too orderly. There were no signs of forced entry, no damaged locks or tampered windows. However, one detail stood out. The home security system had been unarmed for 3 days. A follow-up inquiry revealed that Kiana had installed the system herself in March 2025, after what she described to a technician as a former partner showing up uninvited. There was no official report tied to that claim. No police call, no complaint, no restraining order, just the installation log. Digital forensics pulled the system's event history. The logs confirmed frequent late-night arming and disarming from March through May. But from June 13th onward, the system remained inactive. That discrepancy caught the attention of investigators. Why would a single mother with 2 young children, living alone, suddenly stop using her own security system days before her murder? They moved to examine her mobile device, which had been recovered from her vehicle. With consent from next of kin, a forensic analyst cloned the phone's contents and began parsing communications. Kiana had deleted over 200 messages in the last month, most of them from a single number. The number was not saved under a contact name. It appeared only as digits. A filtered search found 14 deleted messages between June 10 and June 15th. Among them, "Stop playing games with me." "We're not done." "I told you I'd see you soon." These messages were marked as read, then manually deleted. The iCloud sync preserved them. Kiana never responded. Her sister Talia was interviewed the next day. She had last spoken with Kiana on Sunday, June 15th, less than 24 hours before the shooting. According to Talia, nothing in Kiana's tone raised alarm. She said she was taking the kids to get dinner Monday after daycare. She sounded tired but normal. I asked her if she was okay living by herself. She said, "I'm good, just tired of feeling like I have to look over my shoulder." When asked if she knew who Kiana referred to, Talia paused. She never gave a name, just said, "him." Investigators continued reconstructing Kiana's final days. GPS tracking from her phone showed consistent routes: daycare drop-off and pickup, work shifts, grocery stops. There were no anomalies until June 14th. On that date, at 6:03 p.m., her phone showed a brief 3-minute stop at a Shell gas station on Lakeland Drive. That alone wouldn't matter, but the station's security logs provided a lead. A separate vehicle entered just moments later and parked at the pump next to hers. The driver did not get out. He remained seated, engine running, windows up. When Kiana left, so did the other vehicle, 5 seconds apart. This wasn't just coincidence. Surveillance cameras confirmed that the vehicle in question, an older model blue Dodge sedan with tinted windows and no visible front plate, appeared again on traffic cam footage from June 16th, roughly 1 hour before the McDonald's shooting. Same car, same pattern. This vehicle was never registered to Kiana or anyone in her immediate family. At this point, investigators acknowledged a working hypothesis. Kiana Jackson had been under surveillance. Whether by a former acquaintance, a resentful ex, or someone else entirely remained uncertain. But the pattern suggested one thing. Whoever pulled the trigger had not stumbled onto her by chance. They had planned it. As a lead detective summarized, "We often ask why victims don't speak up, but Kiana did, in her own way, just not in a way the system knows how to catch." A review of calls to local law enforcement found no formal complaint ever filed under her name, no protective order, no documented threats. But the signs were there, unfiled, unprocessed, unrecorded. A woman disabling her alarm system days before her murder, a phone full of deleted threats, a car trailing her movements in 2 separate locations. The story wasn't just about a mother being murdered. It was about a woman who'd been quietly trying to distance herself from a presence that wouldn't go away. And in that silence, the threat only grew closer. June 17, 2025, less than 24 hours after the shooting, forensic analysts from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation completed preliminary reconstruction of the crime scene outside McDonald's on Stribling Lane. By all technical accounts, the shooting was efficient, controlled, and over in less than 15 seconds. What it lacked in duration, it made up for in precision. Kiana Jackson was found collapsed on the pavement beside her vehicle's driver's side door. Blood pattern analysis indicated that she was shot at near point-blank range, from an angle consistent with someone standing just outside the door. No defensive wounds were noted, no evidence of a struggle, no attempt to run. The entire scene suggested she never saw it coming. MBI ballistics confirmed the weapon used was a 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol, discharged twice. The first bullet entered Kiana's upper chest, perforating the sternum and striking the left pulmonary artery. Immediate internal bleeding followed. Time of death was determined to be within 60 seconds of impact. The second bullet, fired moments later, entered the shooter's own head above the right temple and exited through the left cheekbone. He was found still breathing, though unresponsive. The weapon was recovered near his right hand, loaded with a single remaining round. No fingerprints other than the male's were found on the grip, a slide, or magazine. The shooter had brought his own gun. He had loaded it. He had timed his arrival. Vehicle surveillance footage from the adjacent Wendy's and a nearby gas station were pulled to establish timeline consistency. From 6:38 p.m. to 6:40 p.m., the shooter's vehicle was parked diagonally across the lot, partially obscured from direct view by 2 SUVs. At 6:41, Kiana's SUV entered the lot, visible on the east entrance camera. She parked in a visible space near the playground. Between 6:42 and 6:44 p.m., the shooter remained in his car. At 6:44:13, he exited. By 6:44:19, Kiana opened her door. At 6:44:23, the first shot was fired. Digital timestamps were synced with dispatch audio and matched the 911 call logged at 6:45:01 p.m. The caller reported, quote, "A woman's been shot. He just shot himself. McDonald's parking lot, kids in the car." That audio file was sealed as part of the active investigation, pending release under FOIA guidelines. Investigators now turned their attention to the gun. The serial number had been filed off, an attempt at obscuring traceability. But metallurgical imaging revealed the original serial. Registered in Louisiana, reported stolen in 2022, that linked the gun to a separate theft case in Baton Rouge, never solved. Forensic recovery of trace skin cells on the weapon grip confirmed the shooter had handled the gun within minutes of the incident. Sweat residue on the interior of his shirt collar suggested elevated body temperature. likely caused by heightened adrenaline or agitation. There were no signs of drug or alcohol impairment in the initial blood panel. Meanwhile, the autopsy for Kiana Jackson was finalized by 4:30 p.m. that same day. The medical examiner confirmed gunshot entrance wound, anterior chest, approximately 6.4 centimeter below clavicle bullet path. Anterior to posterior, slightly upward trajectory. No exit wound. Bullet lodged near T4 vertebrae. No secondary trauma. Estimated survival time post-injury. 45 to 60 seconds. The bullet was surgically extracted and matched to the gun found at the scene. No casings were recovered from within the vehicle, further supporting the theory that the shot came from outside. Glass fracture analysis on the window confirmed it was rolled down at the time of the shooting. Forensics determined that the shooter knew where Kiana would park. He approached only when she opened her door, suggesting he had waited, watched, and moved with purpose. This was not an impulsive decision made in a fit of rage. It was a calculated action, carried out in public, in full view of children. Detectives on site made note of the positioning of Kiana's personal belongings. Her purse was on the front passenger seat. Her keys were still in the ignition. Her cell phone was found in the center console, unlocked, with the most recent open app being Google Maps. She never saw the shooter in her mirror, and by the time the first responder reached her body, she was already gone. One investigator, a 15-year veteran of violent crimes, remarked in the case log, "This wasn't just about ending her life. It was about making sure she didn't have time to react. The shooter wasn't angry. He was prepared." The children remained in the back seat during the entire incident. Crime scene photos show their snack bags untouched. Neither door had been opened. The rear windows were partially down, but neither child attempted to exit the vehicle. The older child, age 5, later told a child psychologist, "She was getting out, then she got quiet." In the days following, investigators expanded the scope of the forensic inquiry. They obtained cell tower ping logs confirming both Kiana's and the shooter's devices were in proximity for over 20 minutes prior to the shooting. That proximity included a brief overlap near a gas station 4 miles away, further supporting the theory of targeted surveillance. The case was formally classified by Brandon PD as a domestic violence-related homicide. That designation allowed for additional federal reporting and victim resource support. It also underscored the context many failed to notice. This wasn't random. This was personal, deliberate, familiar. One line in the MBI final report summed up the gravity of the scene. The act was public, the motive was private, but the impact was permanent. By June 18, 2025, just 2 days after Kiana Jackson was shot in front of her children, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation shifted its focus from scene-based forensics to digital forensics, specifically the pre-crime timeline embedded in GPS data, phone logs, and deleted communications. What they uncovered in those files wasn't dramatic in a cinematic sense. There were no confessions, no text that read, "I'm going to kill you." But what emerged was a pattern, and patterns are rarely accidental. The hours before the shooting, and the days before that, began to reveal a digital footprint of someone operating with intent, one that escalated in proximity, precision, and frequency. The key artifact was Kiana's iPhone. It had survived the shooting intact, and its cloud-synced metadata offered insight that was not immediately visible during the initial investigation. Her device history confirmed routine stops, school, work, grocery, but embedded within those routes were anomalies. From June 10th to June 16th, her GPS history showed 5 repeated encounters with a single unidentified vehicle. This wasn't determined by luck. Surveillance timestamps from public cameras in retail parking lots were cross-referenced with plate detection systems run by local law enforcement. On each of those 5 days, the same dark blue Dodge sedan appeared either minutes before or minutes after Kiana's arrival at various locations, often parked nearby but never directly adjacent. Forensic analysts mapped the distances. The Dodge never exceeded 300 feet from her car in any instance. It followed her to gas stations, daycare pickup zones, and on one occasion idled across the street from her residence for over 11 minutes, time-stamped by a traffic camera at 10:42 p.m. Investigators acquired partial plate imagery through traffic light camera footage. The plate was obscured by a tinted plastic cover, a detail that turned out to be deliberate. The plate cover was later linked to a known aftermarket vendor based in Louisiana. Not illegal in all states, but suspicious when combined with movement patterns that mirrored the victim. While digital tracking provided geographic overlap, phone metadata offered temporal proximity. Between June 14th and June 16th, a block number attempted to call Kiana 7 times, each call lasting less than 10 seconds. She answered none of them. The last attempt was logged at 6:12 p.m. on June 16th, just 30 minutes before her death. Simultaneously, her recent app activity showed Google searches for what to do if someone won't stop contacting you and how to block unknown callers permanently. These searches occurred just 2 days before the incident, during a 10-minute session while she was parked outside a grocery store. Investigators now had a timeline of behavior, but more importantly, they had escalation. The shooter hadn't just decided to act, he had monitored, he had anticipated, and by all accounts, he had adjusted his movements to hers in near real time. Two additional pieces of digital evidence reinforce this. First, a Bluetooth signal was detected in Kiana's car logs. An unknown device had paired with her vehicle weeks prior, most likely through a one-time proximity sync. That meant at some point, the suspect had been close enough to her vehicle to establish device visibility. Second, a partial browser history on Kiana's phone included a page titled Mississippi Laws on Harassment. The link was never opened. The search result was there, but the click-through never happened. Whether she was interrupted or simply decided against it remains unknown. At this stage, investigators began asking a new kind of question, not just who did this, but what barriers existed that kept Kiana from reporting it. There was no restraining order on file, no previous domestic incident logged under her name, but the digital trail suggested she was navigating a low-grade siege, one subtle enough to remain below legal radar, yet persistent enough to erode her sense of safety. This wasn't unusual. According to the CDC's 2024 Intimate Partner Violence Surveillance Report, only 28% of women who report stalking or harassment from a former partner had ever filed a formal complaint. That number drops even further when children are involved, due to fear of retaliation or custody loss. Kiana's online behavior, researching protective laws, blocking numbers, changing driving patterns, aligned precisely with those silent warning stages. The difference is that in her case, it ended with a gun. The forensic team completed its digital timeline analysis on the evening of June 18th. A full report was filed to Brandon PD, noting clear pre-incident targeting behavior, consistent with coercive tracking and escalation prior to homicide. While no direct confession existed, the layers of proximity, surveillance, and communication failures made one fact undeniable. Kiana had been hunted. One senior analyst wrote, "The technology didn't fail. The systems around it did. She left a trail. We just read it too late." The shooting happened in less than 20 seconds. But what stayed behind, what lingered in that SUV, was longer, quieter, and more devastating. On June 17, 2025, less than 48 hours after Kiana Jackson was killed, Child Protective Services began crisis protocol for two children who had witnessed the event from the back seat. A 5-year-old girl and her 3-year-old brother. Both physically unharmed, both present when the trigger was pulled. In the aftermath of a domestic homicide with child witnesses, protocol in Rankin County moves quickly. The children were immediately placed in temporary emergency custody with Kiana's maternal aunt, who had been pre-identified as next of kin in Kiana's legal paperwork. That foresight mattered. It kept the children within family. But what no paperwork can prepare for is what happens in the interview room, when those closest to the trauma are too young to explain it clearly and too old to forget it. On June 18th, a certified forensic child interviewer from the Mississippi Child Advocacy Center conducted the first structured conversation with the 5-year-old girl. The interview was observed in real time by a trauma therapist and a detective from Brandon PD. The room was neutral. No uniforms. No recording devices in view. The goal was to establish what she saw without guiding what she said. The child identified her mother by name. She referred to her car as our silver car. She referred to the shooter as Daddy. This was the first verbal link between the suspect and the children, though not yet an admissible one. Still, it aligned with what investigators had begun to suspect based on vehicle history and background records. When asked what happened on the day at McDonald's, the child paused for nearly 20 seconds. She then said her mother was getting out to grab food and that he walked up to the door. When the interviewer asked what happened next, the child answered, "He pointed the loud thing at her chest. Then she got quiet." She was then asked how long her mother stayed quiet. She said, "The whole time." Follow-up questions were limited. This wasn't an interrogation. The purpose wasn't to extract a timeline. It was to understand psychological impact and to document firsthand witnessing. The 3-year-old was not interviewed. At his age, trauma is often assessed behaviorally rather than verbally. He was observed to be highly anxious around male voices and refused to sit in any chair facing a door. That same week, MBI's Victim Services Unit assigned a long-term trauma response specialist to the family. The children were relocated, with court approval, to their grandmother's residence in Pearl. Their aunt remained as legal guardian, but clinical care required access to schools, counselors, and consistent supervision. Beyond care, the children also became legal material witnesses. That's where emotional reality meets the limits of procedure. In most states, including Mississippi, children under age 6 rarely testify in homicide trials. Their statements are documented but not always submitted. Instead, they inform the broader evidentiary narrative, reinforcing motive, intent, and relationship, even if they never see the inside of a courtroom. Still, their presence mattered. It changed the tone of the investigation. It added urgency to decisions about what to release publicly. It forced the press office to rewrite the language in their reports. Not a shooting occurred, but a mother was killed in front of her children. That distinction isn't rhetorical, it's prosecutorial. In quiet rooms, outside the reach of legal briefs or forensic graphs, those two children became a second layer of victims. The justice system can't undo what they saw, but it can acknowledge that justice in their case isn't measured only in indictments, but in whether or not someone ensured they were safe the next time. A note in the detective's case file, written after attending the second welfare check, reads, "She asked if her mom would be back when the man wakes up. She doesn't know what death means yet, but she knows she can't unsee it." June 19th, 2025. The man who pulled the trigger in McDonald's parking lot died at University of Mississippi Medical Center. The self-inflicted gunshot wound he delivered immediately after killing Kiana Jackson proved unsurvivable. His name was officially released at 3:14 p.m. by the Brandon Police Department. Jean-Therese Dampier, 27 years old, a former laborer with no current employment at the time of the shooting. But the story didn't end with his death. If anything, it forced investigators to change their approach. No trial, no direct interrogation, and without a living defendant, the forensic record became the only remaining method to understand what had led up to the shooting. In cases like this, the logic is simple. If the suspect is dead, you work with what he didn't take with him. Search warrants were executed at Dampier's last known address in Mendenhall, Mississippi, a one-bedroom unit inside a converted duplex. Officers from the Simpson County Sheriff's Office and MBI's Criminal Investigation Division conducted a complete forensic sweep of the residence. The apartment was modest but not abandoned. Inside were signs of recent activity: a used coffee cup still on the counter, clothes still in the dryer, and a cell phone charging at the wall. Dampier's wallet sat near the bed. Nothing was packed. No note left behind. The first priority was the phone. Investigators recovered a Samsung Galaxy S21 with a working passcode lock, which was bypassed by digital forensic software using a backup key stored in cloud memory. Once accessed, the data confirmed two things. Dampier had been following Kiana's movements for weeks, and he had documented parts of it. In the phone's gallery were screenshots of location pins, captured from Google Maps. Each pin corresponded with places Kiana had been confirmed to visit: her workplace, the daycare, and her residence. Metadata showed they had been saved over a span of 18 days, beginning May 28th. Also found were time-stamped images taken from a distance, showing Kiana's car parked in various public places. These were not shared publicly or sent to any contact, meaning they were kept solely for him. Investigators flagged these as indicators of surveillance behavior consistent with premeditation. More significant was the app usage history. Dampier had installed a Bluetooth tracking app, commonly used for locating misplaced personal devices, that showed his phone had been in range of Kiana's vehicle multiple times prior to June 16th. The likely scenario: at some point he had gained physical proximity to her car long enough to sync the app's tracker. His internet history reinforced motive. Between June 11th and June 15th, he had visited websites on custody laws in Mississippi, what happens if the mother keeps kids away, and how to remove someone from your life legally. This type of phrasing didn't suggest someone seeking shared custody. It suggested someone who believed control was being taken from him. Investigators also reviewed his recent call logs and messages. Over 20 unsent drafts were stored in the phone's messaging app. One draft, written 3 days before the shooting, read, "You think you're smart. You think you won." It was never sent. Financial records didn't show significant activity. He had no credit cards, only a checking account with under $50 at the time of death. There were no recent large purchases, no hotel bookings, no firearm purchases on record. The gun used in the murder had been stolen in Louisiana in 2022. Ballistics confirmed it matched the serial number recovered under metallurgical scan. What stood out in the apartment was the absence of anyone else. No photos of family, no pictures of the children, no documents showing visitation, custody filings, or legal representation. Dampier had no known address change forms, no listed employer since early 2024, and no driver's license renewal. He had, in the last year, begun detaching from official systems. That isolation mattered. One analyst described it this way: he wasn't building a case to fight her, he was building a reality where she was the threat, and he was owed something back. A social media analysis, conducted through subpoenaed access, showed that Dampier had viewed Kiana's public profiles multiple times daily. He hadn't interacted with them since their separation, but had clicked through her posts, tagged photos and comment sections, especially posts where her children appeared. There was no manifesto, no video confession, but the composite was clear. Dampier didn't snap. He stalked, he tracked, and when distance no longer gave him the illusion of control, he closed the gap permanently. Cases involving post-mortem suspects rarely resolve cleanly, but in this one, the absence of ambiguity was also the conclusion. The evidence did not require interpretation. It required acknowledgement. He had left a pattern behind, not to explain himself, but to make sure he wasn't forgotten by the person who was trying to live without him. By June 20th, 2025, just 4 days after Kiana Jackson's murder, the case had already moved from local headlines to national coverage. Major news outlets picked up the story after the Brandon Police Department issued a formal press statement confirming the victim's identity, the nature of the shooting, and the presence of 2 children in the vehicle. At first glance, the facts read like a closed case. A man shot a woman in public, then turned the weapon on himself. Both died. No charges, no trial, no ongoing threat. But the simplicity of that conclusion was misleading. This wasn't a story about a random act of violence. It was about all the warning signs that preceded it, and all the systems that failed to intercept them. Brandon PD, under pressure from both the public and the press, released a revised incident timeline and confirmed that the case had been reclassified as a domestic-related homicide. That change shifted the context of the narrative. It forced institutions to acknowledge that the murder wasn't just personal, it was preventable. In the following days, local officials and domestic violence advocates spoke out, not in generalities but in specifics. The Rankin County Victim Services Coordinator gave a televised statement noting that Mississippi's domestic violence protective order process, while available, remains underutilized in non-married partnerships and relationships without prior police reports. In Kiana's case, no official complaint had ever been filed. And yet, as investigators had already confirmed by Chapter 6, the forensic trail left behind by Joan Terry's Dampier documented extensive surveillance, message drafts, location tracking, and behavioral escalation, all of which occurred below the legal reporting threshold. Public commentary began asking different questions. Not why didn't she leave, but how would anyone know when the danger becomes imminent? That's where policy gaps came under review. Under current Mississippi law in 2025, a person can petition for a protective order if they are in fear for their safety. but the process requires documentation or immediate threat. Fear alone, without physical harm or recorded threats, isn't always enough to activate judicial protection. In Kiana's case, her deleted texts, online searches, and passive behavioral changes like changing pickup routes and silencing her phone weren't legally actionable at the time, but they were still signals. Signals that, in hindsight, weren't subtle at all. The public narrative shifted again when WLBT News released excerpts from 911 call transcripts and confirmed that a restaurant employee had made the call, not a bystander. Multiple customers had reportedly frozen, unsure whether what they heard was a firecracker or a gunshot. Some crouched behind booths, others rushed to their cars, but the only person who immediately called emergency services was a 17-year-old working the drive-thru. That detail mattered, not because it made the witnesses guilty of inaction, but because it clarified what trauma looks like in real time. Most people don't know what to do when violence happens that close. The public doesn't always process horror the moment it unfolds, but the law must. 2 days later, local organizers held a candlelight vigil in Kiana's name, attended by nearly 200 people. Among them were domestic abuse survivors, legal advocates, and social workers. It wasn't a rally, it was a reckoning. Speakers didn't ask for sympathy, they asked for infrastructure. They called for better victim resource training in schools, more accessible restraining order filing stations in clinics, and real-time flagging tools within social service systems. One counselor said plainly, "The signs were there. They weren't hidden. We just didn't connect them fast enough." From a procedural standpoint, the MBI and Brandon PD were commended for their speed, their digital recovery, and their coordination, but no investigator left this case thinking it was just about forensics. They understood something deeper, that many victims live in quiet risk, not because they're passive, but because the system doesn't respond until blood is on the floor. In internal review logs, the Rankin County Sheriff's Office flagged this case as a training priority for future intervention modeling. Translation? This wasn't just a tragedy, it was going to be a case study. And behind that designation was a name. Kiana Jackson wasn't a statistic. She was a 25-year-old mother of two. She worked, paid her bills, and took care of her children. She researched her options. She adjusted her routines. She sensed what was coming. But sensing danger doesn't stop it when systems wait for thresholds. What followed in the press wasn't sensational. It was methodical. Crime analysts broke down the timeline. Advocacy groups circulated guides about early-stage stalking recognition. A public database of anonymous reports was proposed for cases where victims fear retaliation, but need documentation logged. It wasn't policy yet, but it was pressure. Sometimes a story doesn't change the law, but it reminds the public what it costs to wait for permission to act. By June 17, 2025, less than 24 hours after the incident, the Rankin County Sheriff's Office, in cooperation with the Brandon Police Department, concluded its initial investigative phase. The facts were clear. Kiana Jackson, 25, had been shot multiple times while seated in her vehicle outside a McDonald's on Highway 80. Her two young children were in the back seat. The gunman, identified as 28-year-old John Terry Dampier, shot her at close range, then immediately turned the weapon on himself. He died later that day at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. The autopsy confirmed a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Kiana was pronounced dead at the scene. The case, from a procedural standpoint, closed quickly. Ballistics matched the firearm to Dampier. The surveillance footage from the McDonald's parking lot captured the entire sequence. Eyewitness testimony aligned with the physical evidence. The approach, the shots, the immediate collapse, and the single recoil of the assailant's body as he turned the gun on himself. There were no signs of a struggle, no ambiguity. This was premeditated, deliberate, and carried out in public view. Crime scene photographs catalog the spent casings, the shattered glass of Kiana's driver's side window, and the position of the bodies. The 9mm handgun, legally owned by Dampier, lay near his feet. A forensic sweep of both vehicles found no secondary suspects, no alternate theories. Investigators recovered Dampier's cell phone and sent it for immediate digital forensics. Within the phone were weeks of unsent text messages, many angry, some delusional. One draft message read, You wanted to keep my kids from me? Let's see how they grow up without either of us. The forensic analyst flagged it as a critical indicator of suicidal ideation and retaliatory thinking. Signs that, if seen earlier, might have prompted intervention. But no one had seen it. No one outside that phone. By June 19th, Mississippi's Department of Child Protection Services confirmed emergency custody arrangements for the children. They were placed with Kiana's mother. Both had undergone trauma assessments. While physically unharmed, the psychological impact of witnessing their mother's execution would define years of care to come. Authorities confirmed that the 6-year-old provided an initial statement to child psychologists identifying a loud bang and mommy not waking up. His account, brief but consistent, aligned with the timeline and physical evidence. No further interviews were scheduled. Trauma specialists recommended therapeutic silence until clinical conditions were safe. The legal system had no defendant to prosecute. There would be no court appearance, no cross-examination, no sentencing. But the social repercussions didn't end with the case file. On June 21st, local and regional domestic violence advocacy groups held coordinated press conferences. They pointed out that Kiana had made previous verbal disclosures about her fear of Dampier. No formal restraining order had been filed. No emergency custody hearing had been granted. The system, as it often does, required documented abuse or direct threats to take legal action. Thresholds that too often fail to account for escalating patterns of control, obsession, and violence. The public outrage was immediate. The fact that Kiana was murdered in a family-friendly daylight setting brought the issue from theory to reality. It forced a painful but necessary public reflection. How does a woman who followed the expected steps, leaving the relationship, rebuilding her life, focusing on her children, still end up murdered in broad daylight? How did the institutions designed to protect her fail so completely? The town of Brandon, like many small southern communities, was unaccustomed to this kind of crime. Personal, public, and final. The footage circulated across local news and Facebook pages, viewed hundreds of thousands of times within hours. It was not speculation. It was not hearsay. It was recorded, time-stamped, verified, and that made it harder to ignore. Kiana had been a nursing student. Her friends described her as focused, private, protective of her children. Dampier, despite prior arrests and public arguments, had maintained access, not just to the children, but to her physical space. She had not changed her routine. She believed she was safe in public. She had chosen a McDonald's, of all places, likely believing the visibility would keep her safe. That illusion broke with 3 gunshots. Her funeral was held on June 22nd. Attendance exceeded the church's capacity. Community leaders, teachers, neighbors, and several staff members from the very restaurant where she died all came. Her children did not attend. A therapist had advised the family against it. During the service, her mother gave a short, restrained speech. She was trying to get out, she said. She deserved more time. Local authorities responded to public pressure. Within a week, the Brandon Police Department announced a formal review of their protocols for domestic violence intervention, particularly in cases where victims reported fear but lacked documented assaults. A state representative proposed Kiana's Law, which would allow for immediate protective hearings based on digital communications and credible threats, even in the absence of physical violence. It passed committee 2 weeks later. Whether it will become law remains uncertain, but its introduction reflected a shift, a recognition that the system must adapt to threats that are no longer hypothetical, but historical. By July, Kiana's case was used in police training seminars across Mississippi as a cautionary lesson in overlooked danger signs. A social worker who had briefly worked with Kiana stated anonymously, "She wasn't the kind of client who screamed for help. She whispered it, and sometimes the system only hears screams." Cases like this don't leave loose ends. They leave fractures in families, in communities, in trust. They force a bitter question. Would earlier intervention have saved her? We can't answer that definitively, but we can say this. Warning signs were present. Digital footprints existed. The pattern was visible. And yet, she died in front of her children because nothing in the system acted fast enough to prevent it. There is no true closure in cases where justice cannot be served in a courtroom, But there can be accountability. There can be change. Kiana Jackson's name, now tied to a preventable death, may yet become a symbol of needed reform. Not in a speech, not in a press release, but in practical, tangible protections for the next woman who says, "I'm scared, but he hasn't hit me yet." And maybe that, even in tragedy, is something worth holding on to. I've told you this story not just to recount a tragedy, but because I believe every story like Kiana's carries a warning and a wake-up call. If you're in a situation that feels wrong, don't wait for the system to catch up. Trust your instincts, ask for help, and document everything. And if you're someone watching from the outside, don't dismiss the quiet signs. Sometimes silence hides danger. What would you have done differently if you were Kiana's friend, coworker, or neighbor? Do you think the laws in your state are enough to protect women like her? If this story moved you, let me know where you're watching from, or what part hit hardest. And if it didn't, tell me why. I'm here to listen. If this video meant something to you, subscribe for more real stories that matter.